Alright, welcome to Unit 3 for AP World History, and that means it's time to talk about how land-based empires were expanding in the time period 1450 to 1750. And that, my friend, is a juicy story. So if you're ready to get them brain cows milked, let's get to it. Now I'm going to introduce you to these empires in a minute, but first let me tell you what they all had in common. First, these empires were land-based, which means their power came from the extent of their territorial holdings. Now in the next unit, we're going to get cozy with various sea-based empires, which are cropping up during this exact same time period, and the difference is that those empires get their power from, the sea. Second, each of these empires is expanding during this period, not unlike my sweatpants on Thanksgiving Day. And third, the main cause of that expansion was their militaristic use of gunpowder. And that's why you'll often hear them referred to as Gunpowder Empires, which is a good name because it would be much more confusing if they were called Douglas. That's not funny, I'm gonna cut. Anyway, the point is these land-based empires that sprang up in the wake of the fall of the Mongol Empire were growing in this period, and it was the empires that adopted gunpowder weapons that came out on top. And that reminds me, the equivalent of gunpowder in AP World History is my Heimler review guide. It's got exclusive unit review videos, note guides to follow along, practice questions, practice exams, and answer keys for every dang bit of it. So if you want an A in your class and a 5 in your exam in May, then click the link in the description and check it out. Okay, now there are 4 of these land-based empires that you have to know, so let's get familiar with. First, meet the Ottoman Empire, which is the most significant Islamic empire during this period. It was founded in the 14th century after the Mongol Empire went the way of the dodo, and it started small, but it grew rapidly for 2 reasons. First, they controlled this bit of water right here known as the Dardanelles. It was a highly strategic choke point, and they used it to launch many of their campaigns of expansion. And second, Ottomans got busy developing and using gunpowder weapons, obviously. And by the beginning of our period, much of southwestern Europe and Anatolia was under Ottoman control. But perhaps one of the most significant achievements of the Ottomans was the Sack of Constantinople, the heart of the Christian Byzantine Empire in 1453. Anyway, Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II sent his giant military along with their giant cannons to lay siege to the city and started blasting the walls to pieces, and that meant their military could pour into the city for their assault. Anyway, the Ottomans renamed Constantinople to Istanbul, and it became the crown jewel of their growing empire. By the end of our period in 1750, the Ottoman Empire had expanded prodigiously. Second, let's get to know the Safavid Empire here in the Middle East. Now, it was established at the beginning of the 1500s out of the ashes of former Muslim empires, and it also had a humble beginning. But as the empire grew under the leadership of a Shah named Ismail, a very significant development occurred, namely the Shah declared his empire a Shia Muslim state, and let me explain why that is kind of a big deal. Since before this period, 2 major divisions of Islam developed, the Shia and the Sunni. Without getting too far into the significant differences between these 2 sects, it's going to be enough for you to know that their main beef had to do with their conflicting beliefs about who was the legitimate successor of Muhammad. The Shia believed that it could only be a blood relative of Muhammad, while the Sunnis believed successors could be elected by the people. Anyway, the reason that decision was so significant is because it made the Safavids real stanky in the nostrils of neighboring Sunni Muslim empires, most notably the Mughal to the east and the Ottomans to the west. Anyway, later, under the rule of a guy named Shah Abbas, the Safavid military was expanded like mad, and they went ahead and adopted gunpowder weapons, and then they had all they needed to start expanding like an imperial boss. Okay, third, let's meet the Muslim Mughal Empire over here in South and Central Asia, which replaced the Delhi Sultanate in the 16th century under the leadership of our boy Babur. And like the previous empires mentioned, Babur made use of an expanding military armed with gunpowder cannons and guns to extend the geographic reach of his empire. But the Mughal Empire expanded even further under Babur's grandson, Akbar. No, not that one, that one. And this guy was all kinds of tolerant of religious beliefs, which was real nice after centuries of Muslim rule over the majority Hindu population. Additionally, Akbar was a masterful administrator of the empire, and under his leadership, the Mughal became the most prosperous empire of the 16th century. And finally, you need to know the Qing Dynasty in China. Now let's back up for a sec. With the decline of Mongol rule in China, a new dynasty was established, namely the Ming Dynasty in the 14th century. Now it's going to be important to know that the Ming Dynasty was ethnically Han, which is to say that after the outsider Mongols went away, they established a truly Chinese dynasty again. The Ming established peace and order throughout East Asia and expanded their borders through what? Diplomacy? No, gunpowder. Gunpowder is always the answer in this unit. Anyway, by the 1500s, the Ming Dynasty was fracturing due to internal divisions and external wars, and that's when the Ming falls apart and we get the rise of the Qing. Now, the Qing Dynasty was established by another group of outsiders, namely the Manchu people to the north of China. In 1636, they went ahead and took advantage of the fractured Ming Dynasty and invaded to set up their own dynasty. And from there, Qing rulers launched a 40-year campaign of conquest to claim all the former Ming territory, including Taiwan and portions of Mongolia and Central Asia. And the important thing to remember here for this unit is that the Manchu were not ethnically Han like the majority of China's population, which would later cause no small amount of tension. Okay, now that you know some of the major land-based empires, you further need to know that they got a little spicy with one another. What I mean is, since all these empires had unlimited expansion on their to-do list, it was inevitable that they would clash with one another, and they did. And their clashes mainly had to do with conflicting religious beliefs and political goals, and I'm in the mood to give you two examples. First was the Safavid Mughal conflict, which is a series of wars fought between these two Muslim empires in the 17th century. Now, both empires had their eye on expanding into the Persian Gulf and Central Asia. But even more to the point, the conflict erupted because of religious rivalry. Remember earlier when I said it was kind of a big deal that the Safavids were Shia Muslims? Well, I wasn't just saying that for poops and giggles. That decision by Shah Ismail put the Safavids into direct conflict with the Mughals, who were Sunni and both claimed to be the rightful heirs to previous Muslim dynasties. So they started slapping each other in a series of wars that lasted decades, which in the end had no clear victor. And the second example was the Songhai-Moroccan conflict. So the Songhai Empire had expanded significantly by the 16th century and had grown stupid rich because of their participation and partial control of the trans-Saharan trade. But right about that time, they began to weaken because of significant internal problems. And so the growing Moroccan kingdom to the north saw the weakness and decided they wanted to have more control over the trade routes controlled by the Songhai. And so in a surprise invasion, the Moroccans whipped the Songhai, which they were able to do because of their gunpowder weapons, of which the Songhai had none. Alright, click here to keep reviewing for Unit 3, and click here to grab my AP World Heimler Review Guide, which has everything you need to get an A in your class and a 5 on your exam in May. And I'll catch you on the flip-flop. Heimler out.